everybody wants to see Iran weakened. Saudi Arabia wants to see Iran weakened. Bahrain wants to see Iran weakened. UAE wants to see Iran weakened. Israel wants to see Iran weakened. All of NATO wants to see Iran weakened. The United States wants to see Iran weakened. So by attacking Iran, they had the implicit support of pretty much every wealthy country in the world. And every country in the world understood they didn't have to say shit. They didn't have to acknowledge or condone it. And even if they did condone it, they could condone it in such a way that wasn't actually going to limit Israel's efforts to reduce that country's capability.
And why did Israel do this?
I mean, my estimation is that Netanyahu has realized he is in a position to have kind of a once-in-a-generation tactical opportunity to take an existential threat to Israel and bring it to its knees. He was able to, when Hamas attacked on October 7th, he had an opportunity to bring down Hamas in a big way, and it worked. They've done a ton of damage outside of their target, but they have damaged their target significantly, especially Hamas leadership. So now Hamas basically can't mount an effective campaign anymore. They might still exist, but their capability for conflict has been reduced. And then they moved on to Hezbollah, and they did the same thing in Hezbollah. And then they saw the fall of Syria, and then they were able to take some opportunity to grow in Syria. So, I mean, opportunity is presenting itself as conflict expands. If you're in Netanyahu's shoes, and you have the slightest modicum of hope to kind of secure the future of your country for your children, for your wife, for any reason, you're going to see this as, here's an opportunity, I got to take it. Here's an opportunity, I got to take it. Iran was just the next logical opportunity. To be able to go in there and even just damage their Iranian capability to enrich uranium, that's a significant win. And let's also not forget, when all of the conflict ends, Netanyahu's going to have a day in Israel, because that's when he has to face the criminal charges that have been looming over him for the last 7 years. And it's going to be much nicer to sit on that stand when everybody who's watching you knows that you've dismantled Hamas, dismantled Hezbollah, brought back security to Israel, and degraded the uranium enrichment capability of Iran. It's going to feel much better to get judgment on that day when justice is served, knowing that the people are probably going to go lenient on you.
So how serious are these charges? Because this is something that I've been told again and again. What is Netanyahu looking at in terms of these legal cases?
I mean, that's a place where I don't have a deep knowledge for sure, because I don't understand Israeli law. I don't know how, because Israel isn't a country that separates church and state. So very similar to Iran that doesn't separate church and state, it's very unpredictable. On paper, there's corruption charges. On paper, there's charges of nepotism. There's charges of, I think it's embezzlement. So there's some criminal activity that's associated with Netanyahu, but how the criminal courts or how the court system is going to handle that, I don't know. Very similar to what Donald Trump is facing in the United States. Maybe, I mean, he's tried and convicted in a state, but not at a federal level. And that conviction at a state level didn't prevent him from becoming president. So it's the justice system as a separate arm of government is outside of my knowledge base.
Completely fair. You've said something very interesting where you say Israel has been tactically sound, but strategically flawed in the way that it's pursued these wars. What do you mean by that, Andrew?
I would argue that what happened in Israel or what happened in Iran was the right thing at the wrong time. The opportunity to degrade their enrichment facility was one opportunity, but that's not going to destroy the nuclear capability, as we've talked about. The enriched uranium still exists. The weaponization of what...
Wait, you seem very certain about this, Andrew.
Because we've been talking about it for years. For years, there have been reports that Fordo and Natanz, these sites that enrich the uranium do not hold the uranium. The uranium is moved to different, more secure bunkers.
I'm just trying to get this logically, but if Mossad knows where all this shit is, because they must do, right? But they must do.
So
I mean, they're taking people out in the palace, right? They must know.
So here's where it gets uncomfortable.
Okay.
Let's assume that they do know, because I believe it's a safe assumption that they know that the target package they gave the United States wasn't good enough. They know it. Now that's fucking uncomfortable, right? Mm-hmm. So they essentially would have baited the United States to come in and get a political win that has no really military strategic value. For what purpose? Why would they do that? if not just to get the United States involved in a conflict that otherwise the United States wouldn't have been involved in. Because they're still going to have to take independent action against whatever stockpiles do exist. And now they have the opportunity to essentially take that action covertly. There's a difference between overt conflict and covert conflict. Overt conflict, you have to brag about, everybody sees, there's psychological warfare benefits, right? Well, now that the United States has basically said, hey, this thing is done, there's a ceasefire, it's over. Now if Hezbollah, if Israel goes in, too many bad guys, if Israel goes in and eradicates, like sabotages one of these bunkers, or these secret sites, or if they go in and they somehow find some way to destroy or dispose of the uranium, or even steal the uranium, now they don't have to tell anybody, and neither does Iran. And that's something that can actually be done fully covert because it's in neither party's best interest to make it public. If you recall, when Netanyahu brought to the table the idea of, hey, the United States can drop these bunker busters, he also said, if you don't, we have other options. Well, they still have those other options. So what were those other options they were talking about? It was never defined. Were there other options even about these two sites? Are there other options still going to be exercised even after the bunker busters happened, right? It was coded language, but to your point, I think what we've learned with the exploding pagers and what we've learned with drones being launched inside Iranian borders is that Mossad's capability is one that we don't fully understand and can be quite significant.
Do you think that they've kind of played their ace card too early then?
I don't think they've played their ace card at all.
What is their ace card?
That's what we're all waiting to see. I also don't think Iran has played their ace card. I think that they both are retaining options that might be too frightening for any of us to even consider right now, right? For all we know, there's a dirty bomb on a truck somewhere. For all we know, it's already been delivered. For all we know, North Korea isn't holding the uranium on Iran's behalf, right? We don't have any idea just how nasty this whole thing gets. But what we do know is that the United States' actions have created a sizable narrative that Iran is always going to be pushed down and pushed back by the West. And that was something that I think with the election of, what's their new president? Help me out, the new Iranian president.
Yeah.
It's a crazy name.
Yeah.
Pezeshkian or something like that. But with his relatively democratic election, there was a chance for Iran to kind of turn on its own. Well, now there's no incentive for them to do that. Now they can once again kind of say that they're going to be subjected to Big Brother.
So the narrative around the Ayatollah, and I mean, he doesn't help himself, to be honest with you, shall I say, his robust choice of language, particularly when it comes to Israel, is that this guy is an Islamic fundamentalist. He's fundamentally unstable. The regime is unstable. These are the type of people who would launch a dirty bomb, who would send a nuke into Israel. We've interviewed Glenn Greenwald on the show, and he's been saying, and his argument is, we say this about every regime.
We say this about every regime.
Whether it's Iraq, whether it's about Syria, blah, blah, blah. These are standard.
I don't think anyone said Saddam was an Islamic fundamentalist.
No, not Islamic fundamentalist.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm disagreeing with Andrew, actually, but yeah.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, how much of this is propaganda, and how much of this is actually accurate?
I don't want to call it propaganda because propaganda has a very specific term, right? Propaganda has a purpose, and that purpose is to intentionally shape the interpretation of information for a population. I do think that we are in the middle of an information warfare landscape, and that information landscape continues to evolve because different people, different parties have different interests. Yes, you have one country and the other country who are trying to shape a narrative in their favor, but then you also have third countries who are trying to wreak chaos or capitalize on some conversation or some topic for their own best interest. And then you have for-profit media that's layered in there as well. So the information landscape is an absolute nightmare. But then when it comes to politics, especially in the United States, what we've seen since the 1970s is that politicians have found that the American voting base is frankly not very intelligent. So they have to deliver messages simply. And then in the work to deliver those simple messages, they've also discovered that they can basically say any fucking thing they want. And if they say it enough times, their voting base will start to parrot the message that they hear. That has nothing to do with human intelligence. That has everything to do with human behavior, right? It's a cognitive bias. The thing that you hear the most becomes the thing that you start to believe. So what we see coming out of CIA believes that all people are born with a spy secret superpower. For some people, that means they can win deals. For others, they can spot liars. Some can even seduce lovers. I built a free 3-minute test to help reveal to you exactly what your secret hidden superpower is. All you have to do is click on the link in the description below, take the test, and start using your spy superpower to stay ahead of 99% of people. Out of our senior leadership in the United States, what most countries see coming out of their senior leadership is less the truth and more the party line that they want the people to believe. Not because they're trying to create propaganda, but because that's just what they're trying to do. So to your point about every regime kind of having this whatever cloak and dagger, violent agenda, whatever it might be, we say that a lot because it's a very simple message. My concern is that what I have seen at CIA is that what we read in our classified traffic is not what the American people are told. What we read in our classified traffic is not what news journalists put out there. Sometimes it's just 2 or 3 days ahead of what the news cycle talks about. Sometimes it's completely different than what the news cycle talks about. Sometimes it's a complete and intentional fabrication because the narrative that's coming from policymakers has to be different than the truth, because to tell the truth to the American people would be to tell the truth to all of your adversaries as well, right? So I get it. I get why secrets are important, but the idea that Iran could launch a nuclear device against Israel to obliterate Israel, that's not a real threat. Why aren't we talking about the actual real threat? The actual real threat would be something like a suitcase nuke that's smuggled through maybe even Turkey, that's dropped in Tel Aviv and remotely detonated from, who knows, Jordan.
Well, this is, I think, what Francis is getting at. I don't think Francis was suggesting that this is a regime that is in a position to launch a nuclear-tipped ballistic missile. What he's getting at with you is, do you think this is a sort of regime that if it were in a position to attack Israel with a nuclear weapon of any kind, or a dirty bomb or something, that because of their ideology, they would be willing to do so?
I don't believe so.
Because?
Because nuclear deterrence is another topic that's studied in War College, right? Most countries want a nuclear weapon not to use it, but to prevent other people from encroaching onto their own sovereignty.
Right.
If Iran had a nuclear capability, everybody would have thought twice about running a preemptive campaign, right? North Korea has never had a preemptive campaign launched against them since they've possessed nuclear weapons. And they can't even deliver their nuclear weapons, right? So we've already seen how this kind of principle runs true. There are multiple countries in the world. There's only 9 countries that are indigenously capable of creating nuclear weapons. But there are 14 countries that actually have nuclear weapons on their soil, because nuclear-capable countries have given nuclear weapons to not nuclear-capable countries in order to prevent against any of these kind of first strike or preemptive strike efforts. It's called a nuclear hedge or a nuclear deterrent. When someone has a big gun, a big bomb that they can use against you, it makes you think twice before you violate their sovereignty.
Right, but
so why would the Ayatollah choose to launch a nuclear weapon? A nuclear weapon is not going to destroy Israel. A nuclear weapon is going to do massive damage, but it's not actually going to eradicate the institution of the Israeli government. It's not actually going to eradicate the Jewish people. So nuclear weapons are big, scary things, but they're still just weapons. So in order for the Ayatollah or for the Iranian regime to actually carry out on their promise of making the Jewish faith and the state of Israel extinct, they would need more than 5 nuclear weapons. It would be a very difficult task. It's something that's going to require both military and ideological efforts concerted.
The reason I was going to just push you on it is twofold. Number one is, you said yourself we should be concerned about a suitcase with a nuclear device. But that sounds to me like exactly what I'm saying, which is these people might be willing to do that, right?
So, but the timing is different. Before a preemptive strike, I don't think they were willing to do it, because what's the benefit? They have very little to gain and much more to lose.
So you don't think they want to destroy Israel?
I think that their stated claim is to destroy Israel, but the way to destroy Israel is not with a nuclear bomb. The way to destroy Israel is going to be, it has to be ideological, it has to be fundamental, it will involve violence as well, but it's got to be more complicated than that. It's got to be more refined, more sophisticated than just an explosion in Tel Aviv.
Do you think part of the way that you destroy Israel is essentially you win the propaganda war? So you see what's happening with Gaza, where people are horrified by the images that are coming out of there, and quite rightly so. It's war. It's awful. Children are dying, etc., etc. Do you think that's how they win, by turning an entire generation of kids and people against the idea of Israel?
That is an important piece of it, right? Because if you make your target into a victim, you don't win, because the victim becomes the hero. Right? It becomes the one that gets all the support. It becomes the underdog. It becomes the counterbalance. So when we hear this rhetoric from politicians about obliteration and destruction and regime change, we have to understand that just because you change the Ayatollah or the president or the prime minister, it doesn't actually, unless it changes the fundamental makeup of the country, you don't really have a regime change at all. You just have a person change. You have a position turnover, right? It's the same way when it comes to Iran's very nebulous promise to destroy Israel. What does that even mean? I think those of us who are not Iranian and those of us who are not Israeli, I think we come up with one image that's different than what Israelis come up with. That's different than what non-Israeli Jews come up with. That's completely different than non-theocratized Iranians, which is of course different than the Ayatollah. It's not clearly defined. But again, speaking through a lens of like a professional combatant, you can't win a war just by destroying the target. You have to change the mindset somehow, whether you do that by winning hearts and minds or whether you do that by just depressing their hopes and dreams of anything better.